I guess the obvious first question is if you could just introduce yourself, who you are, what you did on this game, and...
Sure, yeah. I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm one of the designers of this game. I'm an Australian, but I live in Cambridge at the moment, and I'm a game designer sort of part-time, but I also am a research scientist for my day job.
Hi, I'm Brett Gilbert. I'm the other designer of this game, and I'm pretty much a full-time game designer now, so almost. It's a precarious position, but almost a full-time game designer. And this is a game we worked on 3 years ago now, I guess. So it's a game that's been long in the making, but we're very happy with the result.
Okay, so it is called Professor Evil and the Citadel of Time.
It is indeed.
Who is this Professor Evil?
Here he is. He's a little bit misunderstood. He has his mansion, his citadel, and he's a time traveler. And he's gone through time stealing precious artifacts. And it's our job, the members of the team who are playing, to rescue those artifacts before he locks them away forever. So he's the nemesis, and we are the plucky team of adventurers to rescue those from his mansion.
Mm-hmm. It seems like you have quite a universe that is coming almost outside from the game that is all in the game. Do you have a ton of documents that at home that served you in the creation of this game?
Thank you, Brett. Give me the question. No, not really, to be honest. Actually, the original prototype was very plain, and really, I think this is the work of Funforge, really bringing in that world, and Biboun with his, sorry, Biboun, if I've completely mispronounced your name, but bringing that world to life. Because for us, I mean, the Professor was always a character, but it wasn't realized in art or in... we had the story, but I don't think we had the world fleshed out as you see it now. So I think that's definitely something Funforge has really brought to it. And so it's been a really good collaboration, I think, in that way.
Speaking of your first idea, what was the first idea for this game? Was it co-op from the get-go?
Yeah, I think we were interested about having a lot of co-op games are somewhat abstracted. Like the thing that you're fighting against can be very abstract. Pandemic, for example, it's hard to personalize fight against a virus or fight against a forest fire. So I think we wanted to have an actual person who's present and that you're interacting with. And so I think the idea came from how would you have a character like that? How could you have that in a simple enough game that didn't require it to be controlled by another player, or and how can you really have a feeling that he's a character? But at the same time being controlled by some system. I think that's probably one of the sort of really core kind of ideas in the game, I'd say.
So it was never a question to have a player control the character, like a 1v all?
No, absolutely not. I don't think either of us are very... I think we're interested in really more pure cooperative games, really, where people really get to communicate with each other and work together. And yeah, so that was really the only option for us, I think.
Okay. Obviously, you said we several times during the last few answers, but it's not the first time that you're working together. You have a ton of other games together. What do you find in each other? How do you qualify your team? What do you bring to the team, each one of you?
I think we are very different, and I think that's why it's been successful. I mean, Matt is much better at ideas and about rendering those ideas into a playable prototype and just bash through it and see what happens. I think I'm more instinctively an editor or a developer in a sense. And once I've understood that idea, then it's a question of how do you express it in the best way possible, and which bits are the best bits and which bits can you leave aside, because all games need all of those things. I mean, neither of us are particularly theme-led, which is, Matt said, this is why Funforge is such a good partner for this kind of game, because they brought all of this color to it. But there's mechanisms and there's development and there are different elements of that, so I think we do complement each other, and that's true in the other designs we've worked on as well. Generally, they're Matt's ideas, to be fair to Matt, but he has lots. So the question is which are the ones we choose to develop, which inspire both of us potentially, and which we can both have a kind of ownership and intellectual kind of interest in. And not all ideas make it. Not because they're bad, but because they're not necessarily interesting to both of us. You know what I mean? Almost any idea can be a game. And having a second voice and collaborating is a very productive and creative way to express those ideas. So it's been very positive.
When you say that any ideas can be a game, I'm always interested by this idea. Any theme can be a game as well for you?
They can be. I mean, that doesn't make them a saleable game. I mean, some themes are just... I mean, because the game has to eventually become a product. If you want to be serious about it, you have to find a publisher who believe can capture that idea correctly. So yes, in theory, anything. I mean, games are art. They can be anything you want them to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to reach a bigger audience or they're going to reach the right kind of. The players you want to experience them are going to experience them in the way that you want them to experience them. So the wrong theme on the wrong game or the wrong mechanism in the wrong place is going to create the wrong experience for people, and that's where you have to understand why people play or what they enjoy. But in theory, anything could be a game. Like, never say never.
Okay. You said that you consider yourself more like the editorial part of the duo. But Funforge is also obviously a lot involved in this product. You said that they brought in the artist for this. It was not a choice of your. I'm sure you agree with the beautiful art, but you didn't say, hey, we want to work with a Biboun. You just took what Funforge brought to the table.
Yeah. So I mean, well, of course, that was certainly their choice, and although now maybe every game will just ask for Biboun to be the artist. But I mean, yeah, but they brought a lot more than just simply sort of the production and the art design. So we worked a lot with a developer, Doria Rustan, who is not at Funforge at the moment, but she worked a lot on this game, and I think we really collaborated with her to really improve the core experience that we had shown Funforge originally, to really deliver on a game that gave a really tense experience every time you played. I think that was the thing we really sort of nailed down, to make it as much as possible a game that every time it feels like you can win, but every time it's very close and it could go either way. And I think that was a lot of iterations, a lot of simplifying characters, thinking about how they interact with each other, thinking about game length and sort of how many treasures you have to rescue and things like this. It's part of the development process often, but I think in this case really honed the game so that you have this really reproducibly enjoyable experience, which I think is quite important in cooperative games, because I think if too early you feel like the game is really easy, or if it feels just impossible, that it's not much of an invitation for players to come back to the game. And hopefully we strike a balance. Maybe the players will disagree with what we think, but we think that it, even on the first game, you can feel like, even if you don't really know how the game works so well, or maybe you make some mistakes, you can still do well enough to feel like, okay, I can come back and I could do better.
After I've been playing this one, I think a couple times already, it seems like there's not a ton of planification that you can do in the game, because it's always the Professor Evil will always follow your turn, and he's going to mess around and just completely ruin your plans, so to speak. And this is part, but maybe not entirely, but caused by the dice. The dice are here. Were they always in the design, or did you have a deck of cards to simulate his movements? Tell us, how did you settle on the dice?
Yeah, actually, that's just a really early part. It's always been in the game, and actually the dice system really hasn't changed very much. Really, one of the very early systems we came up with was the movement of the Professor and how that could be trained by the dice, or how that could be determined. I know it is a bit divisive. I mean, reading a few reviews, some people like the simplicity of that randomness, in that it's just something you just know it is part of the game and you don't have to plan necessarily as much. Other people feel like it's just too random. I think what we like is that even though it is technically random, it can feel like it's not random, in that when you have a certain experience, and I think there's that moment of breath, I'm not sure if you have, when you play the game and you're like, well, I really hope the Professor doesn't do X at the end of this turn. And when he does that, even though you know that it's from dice, sometimes we were always like, oh, he just knew exactly what we wanted to do, yeah. So I feel like the dice fit in the kind of the casual kind of feeling of the game, and I think it gives more to this idea of him being a character that's independent from us. We can't control him. We don't necessarily know what he's going to do. And I think it worked well for that function, and we didn't really feel like we needed something else for it. And that being said, I think hopefully when people play the game, and I think that's the other thing with the different characters, even more than other cooperative games, really understanding what the different characters can do, and understanding that, I think that's a lot of part of the planning. I think it's understanding what possibly could this other person be really good at on their turn, so we should sort of coordinate that, even though you have to deal with that randomness of the Professor. So,
how did you deal with one of the common problem of a cooperative game is the alpha player? How did you deal with that problem in this game? if you did at all.
I mean, I would say that isn't a problem. I mean, people go on and on about quarterbacking and alpha players, and that's a bit like saying, well, I don't want to play with somebody who cheats. Well, don't play with them, okay? Don't play a co-op game if one player doesn't understand why it's fun to play co-ops. And there is nothing in this game which solves that problem. It's endemic to. It's only a problem if you choose to label it as a problem. And that wasn't ever our experience of playing with our playtesters. It's not an experience that most people have, because most people are cooperative. The social part of it is really important. And you can't. I think it's a game that lends itself to planning. You have to think ahead to what are you going to do on your turn, what are you going to do on your turn. And I think it invites a round the table discussion, maybe more actively than some other cooperative games do. But that isn't a way of solving that problem. I don't think that's a useful kind of way to look at co-op games in a way, because if that's the issue you have with your group, then play a different game. I mean, you might have a different thing.
Oh no, the only thing I'd add is I think, again, coming back to the characters, that's a little bit different. Is I think we tried to give each player a feeling of, here's something you have control of. You have this set of powers that really you're going to get to know probably better than the other players. So I think it's the case of you have a chance to speak up for yourself and sort of say, look, I know I can do this, and that's a way that you can kind of contribute regardless of maybe how the other players are trying to sway the discussion. So I think it's putting a little bit of power into the hands of individual players also is a small nod to that. Yeah. But I agree that it's generally it's not something we try to directly tackle.
Do you have anything in the game that will adapt the level of difficulty for the number of players? Usually that's the case in co-op games.
Yeah, no, actually, no, we don't. Really, we limited the player count to 2 to 4 because you can essentially have the same experience. It's sort of funny because with more players, you have more characters, so you have a wider range of abilities, which can be useful. But at the same time, you have there are more characters. When you, for example, get your special abilities, that percentage of players with a special ability is lower. So there are fewer turns where somebody has a special ability, and there are other things sort of moving around that. It's kind of self-balancing, actually, we found, to be honest. It will feel slightly different, but I think it's actually a fairly balanced experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's true. I think that's what we discovered. It's cooperative games are generally harder with more players, but you have, because there's a geographic element to it, you can be more spread out, and that can work to your advantage sometimes and not to others. With just 2 players, if you're in the same part of the mansion, that can be a problem, but if you're spread out, you're less likely potentially with just 2 of you to have the professor kind of run into you, and that can be bad. So we discovered that it was, as Matt said, it's sort of essentially self-balancing. I mean, there are mechanisms that we've designed it so that you can make the game harder. The difficulty of the game is set by the difficulty of the treasures that you have to rescue, and the ones that it might seem counterintuitive, but the ones that we recommend taking out the ones which give you the most time to rescue them, because they're incrementally harder. You have more time, but there's more opportunity. You have to do more, and yet therefore the professor has more time to get in your face a little bit about it. So if you take those out, it's easier, and if you remove the shorter ones, then the game gets progressively harder. So as a group, you can decide to play a more difficult version of the game, potentially, if you choose. But it's not easy even on the base version. Even on the kind of the base level, the professor's remarkably adept at foiling your plans. So
will we see the professor in other future games?
That I get. Maybe that's more of a question for Funforge. I think there is a world here that could be explored, and there are other characters in this world who we might meet. I mean, it feels like the game invites that potentially. That's something we would like to explore, I think, for sure.
Okay. The last question, jumping to another game you made, Elysium. Will there be an expansion? A lot of people are asking this question.
Well, we would love there to be, and we had a lot of thoughts about what that would be, but I think it just didn't work out with the Space Cowboys. The game, that wasn't part of their trajectory, unfortunately. I mean, the Elysium did a beautiful job with it, and I think it was very successful. But we would like to see more of Elysium, and it might be with a different publisher, it might be with Space Cowboys, but it's a question we're often asked, and there is no definitive answer to it, unfortunately. Fingers crossed, maybe.
All right. Well, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.